so glad to see you all here. I'm Pat Jalen. I'm senator from two of the districts that are going to present today, and vice chair. Well, I'm not anything right now because the appointments haven't been made in the Senate. So I'm here because we all care about education, and I'm just so grateful to the people, the educators that are doing this work and that are leading in developing and piloting and demonstrating methods of measuring what we really value in student learning and in school performance. We know from polls of the American public, and we know from polls of business leaders that they value much more than the ability to answer questions on a standardized test. So I'm glad to see this leadership by educators and real practitioners who are trying out new approaches instead of just implementing the massive changes statewide that we've been receiving from both Washington and Malden. So they're adding this to the work that they already do, and it prepares Massachusetts with initiatives from the field, prepares us to lead in responding to the new opportunities we have under ESSA. So I'm just going to introduce the first two presenters, which is Judy Evans, the superintendent in Winchester, and Eric Fearing, the president of the Teachers Association, and we're all supposed to talk into the mic, Teachers Union in Revere. I want to just also point out that this is very important to us, that there is leadership both from the administration and from the teachers unions working together, and this is an important model to us.
Thank you, Senator Jelen. I was delighted to be approached by Senator Jelen about this exciting consortium. As superintendent, I think it's my responsibility to model both being a learner as well as a leader and working to improve the education of the students in Winchester and throughout the state. And so I was really excited about this innovative approach to looking at how well our schools and our students are doing. One of the things that is most frustrating to superintendents is over-reliance on a single measure on a standardized test to assess how well students in schools are meeting their goals. And as you know, we have thousands of schools, over 300 districts in the state. No two students are alike, no two schools are alike, no two districts are alike. Yet we have a standardized approach to assessing how well we're doing based on a single test on a single day. And if any of you know students, you know that the performance can vary widely depending on factors that are out of the control of the schools. And so what we're trying to do in this consortium is to take a look at multiple factors to assess how well we're doing, with the goal of not just holding ourselves accountable, but working on continuous improvement. And so the two pathways that we're exploring through this consortium involve first looking at performance-based assessments, where teachers are learning together how to write high-quality assessments that will engage students, that will really measure what we want students to know and be able to do by the time they leave us. And the other pathway is to look at multiple measures of school quality, and that includes student engagement, it includes resources, parent involvement, and this very careful work by this small group of 6 districts, which I hope will expand, I think will net huge rewards for the participants. We will learn from and with each other. We will develop alternative ways to learn more about how we can get better at what we do, because that's what we're all about. And so I'm excited to work with these other districts and teachers and teacher leaders, and Eric is going to speak a little bit more about that in a moment. But if you are as invested in the future of Massachusetts and our nation as we are, there's no more important time in the history of our nation to ensure that our students are well prepared to be effective citizens. Then I would urge you to learn more about this consortium and to support our efforts. Thank you very much.
Good morning. As Senator Jalen mentioned, this is something that teachers have taken onto their plate next to all of the things that are already there. And I want to speak a little bit to why we're choosing to do that. To reach this vision of school accountability based on truly multiple measures and targeting all of the things we really value about a school, we need to do a little extra work, and we're willing to put it in. all of this relies on the professionalism of teachers. We're not going to stop all of our classes and pull the children out to give them a one-day snapshot test and then rank schools in a way that guarantees half of them will be labeled as failing. We want to make sure that every school can reach a mark of proficiency, can reach that goal that their communities, the parents there, set for them. And we want to make it clear that that goes beyond just a test score. Even in the academic realm, we think that it's important that we measure with performance assessments, something that's holistic, something that will draw students' engagement and will in fact show all that they've learned inside and outside of school. We want to make sure that those things are being delivered by professional teachers and scored by those who actually know the students. The professionals who meet the students every day are the ones who really have the unique qualifications to make judgments about student learning, and that's where it belongs. We're here as a proof of concept that that's enough. We don't need any outside tests. We don't need to stop learning to go and take an exam to show that our schools are doing what they're supposed to be doing, both academically and for students beyond that realm. So I believe the next one up is Dan or Jack? Yeah. Dan. Fantastic. To speak a little bit about our performance assessment model. Yes. Thank you.
And so welcome everybody. And first, just before I get started, say a few remarks, I wanted to recognize Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, who just entered the room over here, as well as representative from Boston and Representative Mike Connolly from Cambridge. Here we go. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Dan French. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit in Cambridge called the Center for Collaborative Education. We, along with the College of the Holy Cross and Professor Jack Schneider, who will be up here in a minute, we're sort of the coordinating support partners for the consortium. So my job, just in a couple minutes, is to give you a little bit more of the background of the consortium. And then Jack's going to come up and talk about one bucket, which is sort of the school quality measures. And then I'll come back up, spend a couple minutes talking about the performance assessment end, and we'll finish up with the bulk of our time with a panel of 4 distinguished, 2 teacher union reps and 2 superintendents. And before I go further, I also want to recognize some of the other members, important members of the consortium who are here, but not in a formal speaking role, but hopefully we'll hear their voices. So David Sawyer and Lori Regan from Attleboro, superintendent and assistant superintendent, and then the president of the Somerville Education Association, Jackie Lawrence. And I think I've hit everybody. If I didn't, the rest of you will be up here. Okay, so just a little bit of more background, some of which has been covered. So the first one, why did people come together? One is that first point there is important, that while we've had standardized testing, and that's been sort of the driving theory of action in this state for the last 23 plus years, that Massachusetts, for all the accolades we receive, we still rank in the lower bottom third to quarter of all states in the nation in terms of having the widest achievement gaps by race, income, and language. So, and that there's little information about school quality beyond just a single test score, as was covered. Now, this slide came from about a year and a half ago. We held focus groups throughout Boston. We covered students, parents, educators, higher ed, business, community folks. And we asked them this simple question of, what's up there? What should our high school graduates know and be able to do? And what you can see is that it's a very different set of what people need, our graduates need in this world today, than what MCAS was founded on 25 years ago. A completely different set, and one that is very difficult to discern from a standardized test. So what needs to change? People came together because there's a compelling conviction that we need to measure the things we care about and most of those things are not on standardized tests. And so we need to be able to rethink our accountability systems. Even the Council of Chief State School Officers, which is all the commissioners of education in the state, came together and they agree with us that these are their 3 primary recommendations. Accountability systems should be broad indicators. Districts and schools should have flexibility in the story they choose to tell, and there should be flexible testing approaches. So even an organization like CCSSO is embracing of the direction that we're proposing. And by the way, this consortium started with this very same committee. It's the Special Senate Committee for Innovative and Alternative Education. Did I get that right? And when Jack and I presented at different times to the committee, so then Senator Jalen wisely brought us together and said, could we do something? Could we actually define some districts? And then, so that led to a little concept paper, and in the spring, just, 9-10 months ago, we approached a number of superintendents, and we were sort of curious, and lo and behold, we got like an overwhelming response of people who were enthusiastic. At the very first meeting, they said, we've got to have teacher union presidents at the table if this is going to work. And so that's one of the fundamental concepts. So there is our belief. We basically believe that there's a richer means of assessing student and school progress than just one high-stakes test. So our goal, as was said, is to develop this new model, which we'll get into. And just note once again, it's practitioner-driven consortium. And with that, I'll bring up Jack.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hi. This work is in many ways founded upon a fairly radical proposition, although what I think is a really common sense proposition, and that's that you ought to figure out what you care about, and you ought to figure out what is worth measuring before you go out and start taking measurements of school quality. And unfortunately, for a long time, we have been doing this in exactly reverse order, not just here in Massachusetts, but obviously nationwide. And so we are often in the case, and I'm a professor of education, and so I often have to work with data. And we're often in the case where we've got a bunch of measures. We don't know if they measure the things we value, and so then we work backwards trying to cobble together a picture that might begin to tell us something about school quality. And of course, if you look at it from a research point of view, as I often do, you can see that a lot of the work that is attempting to tell us whether or not our schools are succeeding or failing or have what they need relies on a single measure of school performance, which happens to correlate very highly with student income and parental educational attainment. And so we decided to take a different approach in this work. So we wanted to figure out what people actually care about before we begin determining what we are going to measure. So this is another radical idea, which again to me is a fairly common sense one. So the idea is that accountability should inform and empower stakeholders, right? That it is not the purpose of accountability to rank schools for the state. That is not what real accountability is. Accountability is providing the information to all stakeholders, parents, educators, community members, school committee members, policy leaders, administrators, school leaders, providing them with the information that they need and want about their schools, which they care about and have an even more vested interest in than perhaps a state office of education. And to give them information that will allow them to begin to build the schools that they want for their children and for their communities. So we've been engaged in this work now for almost 3 years, which somewhat contradicts what Dan said, but in this line of work, we began piloting it in Somerville, which is where I live, almost 3 years ago. And we are now building a Somerville school quality framework into an MCIEA framework. And we're holding focus groups in all consortium districts with teachers, parents, students, principals, district administrators, and the broader community, and with the broader community, trying to reach everybody in those communities. So we are then building this out into what currently is a 5-category framework. You can see those categories: teaching, school culture, resources, academic learning, character and well-being outcomes. There are 2 points that I want to make about this. The first is that not all of the things that we care about in our schools happen to align with each other. There isn't a tremendous amount of research about this yet, because there isn't a tremendous amount of data about this, but all of the research, and I'm not overstating the claim there, all of the research that takes this broader look of school quality has found that the various things we care about are often orthogonal to each other, which is a fancy way of saying that they don't align necessarily, and that teachers, for instance, can be really successful at engaging students and getting students committed to the process of learning without necessarily raising their standardized test scores more than another teacher who has raised their standardized test scores. And so that is not to say that we don't want students learning basic content material in the tested subjects. That's, of course, one of many things we want our schools to do. But that is not the only thing that we want to do, and we certainly do not want to incentivize our educators to focus solely on that when they are capable of so much more. The second point about these 5 categories as they currently stand is that they capture both inputs and outcomes, which of course is an essential component of any effective measurement system. We don't want to look just at what our schools are producing, but also whether or not our schools have what they need in order to produce the outcomes of value. And so, do schools have the teaching force and support for teaching they need? Do schools have positive school cultures? Do schools have the resources that are necessary? And of course, with resources, we're not just talking about dollars. We're talking about adequate facilities. We're talking about access to a diverse and challenging curriculum. We're talking about a lot more there. And then, of course, with outcomes, we're not talking just about academic learning outcomes, although it's worth noting that when we're talking about academic learning, we're talking about a lot more than the ability to fill in the right bubble on a standardized test in math or English. And that's one of the reasons why we're focusing on performance assessment, which Dan is going to speak to in a moment. Finally, we're trying to present data in a clearer way, a more sensible way to stakeholders. So you can see here a better presentation of data, which is not to say a perfect presentation of data. This also happens to be data from my daughter's elementary school, which is one of the advantages of doing a pilot study in the district that you live in, is that you get to work with people who you actually know and who trust you. And so we do not provide one single number, because schools are not single numbers. We are providing data along multiple categories using plain terminology that can bring stakeholders together so that parents and teachers and administrators and school committee members and other stakeholders can talk with each other and know what they're talking about and communicate with each other and be on the same page. And it's also worth pointing out here that we are not ranking schools in this kind of presentation, nor are we dividing them into quintiles. We are trying to figure out what adequate or exemplary performance is, and then tell community members where their schools are. Because of course schools don't divide naturally up into quintiles, right? We can't say that 20% of schools in Massachusetts are really good schools. It may be 90% of schools. It may be 5% of schools. The odds of it being 20%, however, are pretty slim. And then finally, we are giving people the ability to dive really deep into this data in a way that supports them through their pathways deeper and deeper into learning about schools. So we use plain terminology, we divide into categories, subcategories, and individual measures. And were there more time, I could take you all the way down to individual questions that we use on some of our teacher and student perception surveys, so that people can get really informed about how we are tracking school quality. And actually, it is a kind of fundamental belief behind this work that this work is never done, and that it always gets better, and that it continues to be refined. And so we not only want to provide a data-rich portrait of how our schools are doing, but we also want it to be easy to access, because people often have insights regardless of their formal education level. They have insights regardless of their access to political power. And so the more that people can be included in this process and share their voices and share their concerns, the better we can get at this, and the more that we can support communities in the way that they want to be supported. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan.
Okay, so Jack sort of painted the big picture of what we hope to create, and I'm going to zone in a little bit on academic learning, student learning, because that continues to be, with all those 5 measures, that continues to be sort of one of the most prominent one of how are we proposing to measure student learning, and it's our posit that standardized tests only measure a very narrow range of what kids know and are able to do. And in fact, very little of it is applicable to real life. So you go to get your driver's license, you do fill out a little multiple choice test, at least decades ago when I went. Do you still? Yeah, okay. And by the way, I think I was the only one in that year who failed my multiple choice test. But the real proof in the pudding is you have to go out and show that you can drive. So if that's true, if we have those types of real life tests out there, why wouldn't we try to approximate real life assessments of students in schools rather than administer a standardized test that has very little applicability to real life? So it's our proposal that and instead of just a standardized test where you get the results 4 and 5 months later, why not get real-time data and make it a learning experience for students and a growth experience for teachers? So our proposal is that the main way to assess student learning is through really robust, curriculum-embedded, and teacher-generated, not by external testing companies, but teacher-generated performance assessments that are robust and that really get kids involved in research projects, going out into the community, interacting with the community, oral histories, science labs, but are rooted in real-life questions of science that hook them up with higher education institutions, community organizations, etc. So a little one from a 4th grade science test in New Hampshire where we're working to implement these performance assessments. 4th graders have to build a solar cooker that raises the temperature X degrees and then describe how they do it for 4th graders. And that's pretty good, wouldn't you say? But that's the goal. And that type of work, how do you get there? That type of work requires immense amount of professional development to get teachers to how do you create high-quality performance assessments that are valid. In other words, you're measuring what you're supposed to measure, that are reliable. In other words, teachers in Winchester score the same as teachers in Somerville as in teachers in Boston, and that are sufficient, that there's enough information there to make a good determination of how proficient a kid is. And the goal is not just to have winners and losers, but the goal is to have every single kid reach that bar no matter how long it takes him or her. So that's the goal, is not to have that distribution bell curve, but to really create a system where teachers are growing in their professional development, students are learning real life stuff that they can apply in their later lives, and we're coming out with, we think, better results and a better opportunity for kids across race, income, language, and disability to demonstrate what they know and are able to do in multiple ways. So with that, we're going to hear from the people who really matter, and that's a panel, and I'd invite you folks to come up. Adeline B., I'll introduce them when they get up here. We thought we'd end with a panel discussion of the folks who really are the drivers of this consortium. We're just, Jack and I are just sort of tagging along for the ride, giving a little few helpful hints along the way. But who we have is Diane Kelly, Superintendent of the Revere Public Schools, Paul Tritter, Director of Professional Learning from Boston, affiliated with the Boston Teachers Union, although a unique position because it's funded by both the district and the union. Adeline B., who's president of the Attleboro Education Association, and Mary Skipper, superintendent of Somerville. I'm sorry, I wonder if I should move this. Let's see if they'll let me move this. I think that's better, right? Okay. So here's the way we're gonna work. I'm gonna get us started by just asking them to make initial statements, but then we're gonna rely on you folks. I have a couple questions in the back of my mind in case you all are shy, but my guess is you probably won't be. So,
And can I just say that everybody's
oh, that's right. Yes, as should I. Thank you for that. And when you do have a question, when I open it up, just raise your hand, and I'm going to bring you the mic because it is being recorded. And if you could say your name and just roll, so what's the role in which you're here, that would be great. So, opening question, why did your district join the consortium, and what do you hope to accomplish by engaging in it? So, Mary, you want to start us off, and we'll just go down the line.
Sure.
A couple minutes each, yes.
So good morning, first off. So I'm the proud superintendent in Somerville, and this is actually, the whole school quality work was actually work that we began where we're fortunate enough to have Jack Snyder as a parent in our district. And so this was work that we actually began several years ago in terms of looking at our schools and asking the question in our community, what do we care about? What makes a quality school? And so really starting sort of backward mapping and then working back to come up with a set of indicators, which Jack shared, that matched really nicely to our whole school child focus. And so what we learned from that was the power of when the community and teachers and students and educators are all working together to define what makes a good school, not just an MCAS score. So this was work that was organic to us to start. And then when the concept of the performance tasks and the work that we could potentially do came up, it really sort of flowed with work we had been doing in our district on formative assessments. You know, for several years, we'd worked in partnership. We have a really great, healthy relationship with our teachers union. There's a deep trust of teachers in our district. And so using formative assessments, if you look at Somerville's achievements, you'll see that there's been real sustained growth over the course of the last 5 to 6 years that has led to solid achievement by students and a real quantity of happiness in our district and in our schools. So the idea to join a consortium where there would be other leaders that would come with their union reps, union leaders, as well as just an ability to do systems leadership in the field, I think is what led Somerville to say this is an effort that we want to join. The idea of being able to move and transform our current system of accountability away from the more punitive measure to something that can benefit students, educators, and most importantly, get at the qualities that were shown that parents and community care about was really the investment we wanted to make with our time and our resources. And it has proven to be a really great experience thus far. We'll be talking a little bit more, I'm sure, about how other districts can get involved. But the districts that are here, we sit together and have very rich conversations that aren't just about a piece of paper and one measure, but rather what makes for a quality education for a student? How do we know that? What should students be able to do? How do we know what they're able to do? And for a school level, what makes a quality school? What are the different metrics that parents can look at and say, I'm very happy with that school? Educators in the community in that school can say, here's the things we need to work on in that school to help our school transform and grow in the areas that are evident. So we grew very organically into this, but I can say it has also helped us to think as a district more deeply about our own practice. And we're very much looking forward to working, I know, our teachers with the educators from across the other 6 districts that are involved.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. My name is Adeline B., and I'm from Attleboro, and I wanted to read something to you very quickly because it epitomizes what Attleboro has been known for the last at least 10 years. The vision of the Attleboro Public Schools is to be the center of a community united around education, where all stakeholders value and participate in our collective success. And that's what we need to be doing. As a teacher, I'm often frustrated by the one test score that defines a district. I would never define any of my students by one test score. And as I look out here, a lot of you are very young. You've just gotten out of college, quite a few of you. And so you remember what it's like. And you know that you weren't defined that way. There is so much more to you, and it's because of where you came from. It's not just the school, it's also the community. It's all of the things we put together. And as teachers, it's very important to us to be able to bring that level even higher, to give you more challenges. The real world out there says to you, you need to know how to work with other people. You need to understand what being on a team is like. You need to understand how to solve problems together, because that's what the world we're looking at is. It's not an individual person in front of a computer and that's the end of it. It's so much more than that. And we have to make sure our students of the future, understand that and can go across, find a job, talk to people, understand that they are our future and they're going to have some amazing problems that they're going to have to solve, and they can't do it alone. That is one of the things that makes Attleboro very excited about working with these other districts and hopefully bringing in more districts as well. And that's what will make our future. It will bring more to our students. It will give cross-curricular, teacher-embedded information for our students. We'll be able to allow them to work together on teams to show us what they know. I mean, that example of a fourth grader being able to do that, I as an adult, I wouldn't know how to do that. You know? So those are the things that you give them a problem, solve it. You give them the resources, solve it. It's not a test score. It's so much more. And this is the future, and we hope to have your support in being able to do this and bring it across Massachusetts as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. So in Boston, we decided to join the consortium both as a union and a district for some practical reasons, but I also want to talk about some of the bigger picture reasons as well. The practical reason is both the union and the district are committed to measuring learning in meaningful ways. And it's a really powerful thing, I think, in this consortium that groups of unions and superintendents are on the same page, right? Those of you who are not involved in education and who just read about stuff in the newspaper, just let that sink in for a moment. The superintendents and the teachers' unions are on the same page that this is the way we need to go, right? We sit at a table together, we make decisions. I don't believe we've had a decision in our governing board that's not been unanimous yet, because we really believe that this is the way we need to think about measuring student learning going forward. Let me give you a really concrete reason why. So we talk a lot, you might have heard the term like 21st century skills or something like that. So let me name one. You might have heard the term navigating complex systems, right? So I'm a white guy from Connecticut with two college-educated parents with master's degrees. So basically I was born and the red carpet was rolled out for me, right? So I crush standardized tests. I do really well on them, right? But I can also tell you that sometimes I'm kind of lazy and I don't always work as hard as I have to, partly because I just don't have to, right? I've had a lot just laid out for me, and I've been able to get by, and I'm sure many people in this room have had the same experience. One of the schools that decided to join this consortium in our district is called BINCA, Boston International Newcomers Academy. So that's a school that's all made up of people who are brand new to the country. You've probably been thinking a lot over the weekend about refugees. These are those students, right? So those students come from places like El Salvador, Somalia, some of the most dangerous places in the world, and have found their way to the United States, some of them by themselves, not with families to help them, and manage not only to go to school, but then also after school to work and earn money in order to pay rent, in order to make a life for themselves and their families. So who should win in the competition of navigating complex systems? But that, I think you get the answer, right? Probably not me. And that's what we're after here, right? Is the idea that students are so much more than the scores, right? Now, do we need to help those students who are new to the country to speak English and to write well in English and to master math and to learn about history and all of those things? Of course we do. But I would put my money on them before I would put my money on me. And that's, I think, why we're here. So.
It's hard to come forth. I would echo a lot of what my colleagues have already said, but you know, in the Revere context, we are very proudly the only urban district in the Commonwealth who has maintained level 2 status on standardized testing for 3 years running. One of the other districts in the state that tends to rise to the level 2 status is Cambridge, which spends about $10,000 per pupil more than Revere does. So we're proud of our work. It comes from having embraced ideas like these folks are talking about for a number of years. Our mantra for about 10 years has been rigor, relevance, relationships, and resilience. And that has been our focus in everything that we do, every decision we make, and how we build our budgets, is making sure that we are instilling those things and driving our work around our 4 criteria. As an educator, I am at heart, really, I'm a math teacher. I do this job for other reasons, one of which is to hopefully drive some change around public education. But as a person with 2 degrees in mathematics, I understand that data absent context is meaningless. And over the years, as much as MCAS has helped us in Revere, and it really did, without MCAS, I don't know where Revere would be today, but MCAS was that piece of accountability that made sure that we had a rigorous curriculum and made sure that we delivered that rigorous curriculum to every single student, and when they struggled, it made sure that we put safeguards in place to help them achieve at the highest levels. Without MCAS, I don't know that Revere would have done all of that very important work. But we're at a place now, 25 years later, where it's time to look to the future. MCAS, I think, has served us well. But we're in a place now where we need to move to the next step and help kids, as my colleagues mentioned, get ready for the real world. And that means being able to work on teams. It means being able to figure out disagreements and argue them through and have your reasoned thought be the reason for winning an argument. It means helping them to face a challenge and struggle through it and not just give up or look at the person at the front of the room for what is the solution. I think that the accountability system that we're currently engaged in does a couple of things that bother me as an educator. One is it leaves the student context absent from the analysis and the report. If we don't have students at the center of everything we do, whether it's instructing them or assessing them, then we are missing the boat. The students are the most important thing, and they should be driving everything that we do educationally for them. We need to think about assessment for learning as opposed to the assessment of learning that we've been doing for the last 25 years. The other piece that I'll mention, the reason why Revere Public Schools got involved in this work is because as an educator, for a long time now, nagging at the back of my brain has been the subtext to the Massachusetts accountability system. And in my mind, the 2 things I grapple with are the idea that our teachers are either not capable or can't be trusted to assess their students accurately. And MCIEA gives us the opportunity to rewrite that script. The narrative in this state and across the country of all of these failing schools and everybody's doing horribly and the teachers are the reason that is a misconception. But there are so many more people in this state and in this country who are disengaged from the education world that they believe that narrative. And so for me, working with MCIEA and understanding the phenomenal resource that we have in our educators and trying to highlight that for everybody else is really important to my work as a superintendent.
So thank you, panelists. And so now we'll open it up to the crowd. Who's got a question? Okay, and just a reminder, just speak with a microphone and just situate yourself who you are before you ask a question.
Patty Nolan from that extremely high spending district, Cambridge. And you're totally right. It's embarrassing. I shouldn't even say that publicly, but I will. It's we do some amazing things well with all that money. I'm on the school committee, and yet I hope to do even better. And Somerville also is doing some really innovative things. So my question gets at partly what you were talking about. It seems to me I hear all the time, I hate MCAS and I love MCAS because it does give me a chance. It's a standard, and so it allows me within our district to say what schools are doing. Constantly, whenever I say, let's get rid of it, parents of special needs kids, poor kids, African Americans say, but we didn't pay attention to those kids until MCAS came in. So I'm glad you said that it has had some benefit. And yet we also know it's also had really unfortunate consequences. It seems that the key to success for this next step, which I love the description of it as just the next step in an evolution, is what Dan talked about, which is this cross-sector evaluation of the teachers evaluating. Because if we don't have some sense that the standards are the same in Somerville and Cambridge and Worcester and North Adams, then we won't be trusted by the parents, by the community, by the taxpayers, by anyone, that this is a legitimate replacement. So I'm just curious as to how you have found that in terms of ensuring this cross, I forget the phrase you used. Yeah, the district's going to ensure that it is valid, and that, as we know, as teachers, they are somewhat, it would be very difficult for me if I'm a teacher to evaluate my students knowing so much that, Paul is really struggling, let's say. Is that
a clear question? So it's a great question. To the first piece, just about the special education, any of the ethnicity groups, or to our English language learners, I think the troubling thing is that while the bar has raised across the state, as it has across the nation, it hasn't necessarily done anything to close the gap for those students. And so really, many of us have in our mission every child, every student. And so to really take that on fully, we need more than just one test to be able to determine from an input measure what's happening for all of those groups, that something on the outside, on the outcome end, is not shrinking in terms of the gap. So I think many of us see this as an opportunity to go deeper. I know Somerville does, to go deeper into our gaps and to actually look at the practice across our special education, our English language learner programming, and certainly all our ethnicities. In terms of the interdistrict reliability, which is what I think you were referencing, that's a big piece of the training. So, the building capacity is the first step, and I think we're all excited about that as districts and as teacher unions, to know that our teachers are going to get some top quality training. So they're working together with CCE, our teacher teams from each of the schools attend that, and as that, they really understand the basics of how do you formulate a good test, how do we make sure it's valid and it's reliable, how is there consistency across the districts using that task, and then what do we do with the results of it in terms of our own practice and our own performance. So that will be a big piece of the capacity building that gets done on the front end of the initiative.
Okay. From a teacher's perspective here, we have gathered a very small group of people from each one of our districts. They're all amazing teachers. And after the first training a few weeks ago, I asked them what they thought. Because while I was in the room, I was sort of walking around a little bit, and the energy, the excitement, the ideas just overflowed the room. They really did. And my teachers came back to me and said, it was the most wonderful thing to be able to have the time to brainstorm ideas, to get to that next level, to find out what other people in other districts were doing, and to be able to think about, how can I challenge my kids? How can I get to that next step? How can I make sure it's not just a single answer type of thing, and that maybe more than one answer works for whatever the problem is? That in itself, to be able to do that across districts, we're not saying we're going to give the exact same assignment to children, but we are saying that we're all pushing to get these kids challenged, to ask them questions, to make them really think about the world out there, and to use the resources to solve problems. As I said earlier, the world we live in today, the problems, even over the last week, have become almost insurmountable, I think. And we need people who are willing to challenge the world and find real life solutions, something that will work for everybody. And everybody, we need everybody to partake in that. And this is the first step. It is the next step. And Massachusetts needs to do this.
So if I may, two very quick points. One, it's a myth that standardized tests is the only means by which you can disaggregate data by race, income, and language. You can do that with performance assessments too, and the consortium intends to. And second, around this scoring, New Hampshire's a little bit ahead of Massachusetts in this. But in the first year, they did find some variation between cross-district blind scorers and the individual teacher at the district level who scored work. But by the second year, it was close to exact. In other words, we so misjudge the capability of teachers that teachers are very astute judgers of kids' work, and we should be placing our faith in their hands more.
I just wanted to make one quick point about equity, because that was very embedded in this question, and we were talking about equity with regard to using performance assessment rather than standardized test scores as measures of student learning. But of course, we also want to measure far more broadly than just looking at the acquisition of content knowledge, because we know from evidence, and we have empirical evidence, that the emphasis on standardized test scores has had two impacts on our most vulnerable students. One is that because standardized test scores tend to be predicted heavily by parental educational attainment and family income, we know that the schools attended by our most vulnerable students tend to get stigmatized for having low test scores, as if they are bad schools, as if there is something wrong with the kids, as if the teachers aren't doing their jobs, when research tells us actually it could be a great school where kids are learning a ton and they have amazing teachers. And so the current data systems that we have, because they are so narrow and because they correlate so highly with factors that are outside of the control of children and teachers, do a great deal of damage to those kids and to their families and their communities. And then the second piece that we have evidence about with regard to the impact of our current measurement system is that because standardized tests are the coin of the realm, and because they measure only a fraction of what we want our schools to do, schools that are struggling to get their scores have narrowed the curriculum and have narrowed their missions in a way that, guess who it impacts the most? It impacts our most vulnerable kids who deserve access to the arts, who deserve access to playtime, who deserve to be challenged and not prepared for tests. So the kids who deserve everything that our society has to give them are currently being denied it by the very testing system that purports to be serving them.
Thanks. So my name is Dan Murphy. I'm the Director of Education Policy at AFT Massachusetts State Teachers Union. And in that job, I spend a lot of time in Malden, right? So I look at the existing political and administrative leadership at the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and I would not say they're exactly on board with the vision that you guys are presenting, especially as you laid out, Jack. In fact, you just have to watch the video of the board's most recent meeting when this was on display quite painfully, in the sense that there's some lip service paid to some of the new flexibilities under ESSA, but for the most part, the basic drivers that are being proposed in the revised accountability system are still MCAS scores and high school graduation rates, and predominantly MCAS scores. And there is no wavering at all from this idea of schools being ranked against each other using the measure that the state calls school percentile. So that always guarantees that there's like a bottom 5% or a bottom 20%, and we know how damaging. So my question is, given this political environment, the realities of it, how do we move this policy agenda? Because I see so much resistance in Malden.
Why don't we have Diane and Paul? grab
So
this one?
I think the short answer to the question is we start one person at a time. And the more we do work in this area and the more that we all talk about it, the more we start to shift the understanding on a broader scale of what accountability really should be. And I'll give you a quick anecdote that aligns very well with your comments that you just made and also the comments that Jack made a minute ago. I mentioned that Revere has seen a lot of success recently. Over the last 4 years, we've had 2 different organizations come in and assess our high school. One was the National Center for Urban School Transformation, which named Revere High School the #1 high school in the country, the only gold medal award-winning high school in the country. Yes, the second is the Schools of Opportunity program, which came in and also gave Revere High School a gold medal award. Both of those organizations came in and spent a week in our school really getting at the nut of what happens here, interviewing students, interviewing parents, really finding out how the school restructures their day to accommodate individual student needs, what they do to ensure that underrepresented populations are present in our advanced placement courses and other programs like that. They look at the whole curriculum to make sure we're not narrowly focused just on math, English, science, and social studies, but there are a lot of complements to that, and that all kids have access to all of those complements. And, you know, with those 2 gold medal awards, you'd think high praise, right? Revere High School ranks at the 22nd percentile in the state of Massachusetts, which means, according to the state of Massachusetts, 78% of high schools in this state are better than Revere High School. So something is wrong with the metrics when that's how the state ranks us compared to how we are nationally ranked, and how when you look at one piece of data, which is MCAS, compared to when you look at a comprehensive assessment of what a school is doing for students, especially at the individual student level. So I think, you know, the one person at a time, the more we all talk about this, the more we talk about the fact that MCAS isn't measuring what we need it to measure. It's not helping kids get ready for college and career, which even those folks that you spoke of claim that's their goal, right? Right? So, you know, isn't that a talking point for why we should look in other directions?
Good question, and that's why we're here, is to let people know that this work is going on. One of the things that I think convinced us in Boston to participate in this work is that if nothing changed in the state accountability system, this work is still valuable for teachers and students. So we're going to keep doing it no matter what. And as we do it, we're going to continue to educate people on how ridiculous the current system is, how short the current system falls. And everybody in this room knows that. It's just a matter of moving it forward. There are very few people outside of a small room in Malden who think that this system does anything really good for anybody. And so I'll stick with what I said. I think there are very few people outside of Malden who think that this system, as is, of punishing schools because of standardized test scores, does very good for anybody. And so, and I'm sure most people in this room agree with that, whether we can always freely admit it or not. And so we're going to keep doing the work. And as we keep doing the work, we'll show people about our students, and we'll show people about our teachers and the great work that we can do in real-world learning and with valuable assessment for learning and of learning. And when the house of cards falls down, we'll be ready. And at the same time, we'll keep blowing on it. Try to make it fall over. So,
So, Mary, quickly, but before you jump in, Mary, I just want to recognize Representative Paul Heroux from Attleboro. Thank you.
So I like to be glass half full, and so literally is. I think twofold. I do echo some of the comments that I think we certainly do not want to enter a new accountability system that was equally punitive to what the last one was. However, I do see some movement in a positive way of looking at multiple measures, of looking at student growth and weighing that more heavily. And so I think for myself, I would like to see our consortium working together in partnership to find where there are those entry points with the Department of Ed or other agencies that we can start dialogue and continue that dialogue, because I think fundamentally that is how we will bring about the greatest change. However, I also think advocacy is a big piece of this, and I think that there are districts who have been asking, how do I get involved in this? And I think there's multiple ways that we've talked through. We're certainly kind of the founding consortium districts, but certainly to capacity building wise, there would be opportunities for other districts to get involved, to be able to have teachers have the same kind of capacity building our teachers are experiencing, as well as the consortium grows, getting new members into the consortium. So I think advocacy is a big piece, but I also think open dialogue with even the people in Malden is going to be extremely important to having a realistic, best, high quality accountability and assessment system.
Great. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Edwin. I'm an intern here under Jerry Paracella. It's the Beverly District. My question is, have you guys involved like the American Psychology Association at all, and use that that evidence and that data to support this movement in any way?
We have a research shop, and so we have pulled, for instance, for our student and teacher perception survey scales, we're pulling from benchmarked, field-tested scales that meet all of the APA's criteria for survey scales. So one set of scales that we've used have come from one of my research colleagues, Hunter Gelbach, who was at Harvard, who has moved to UC Santa Barbara to be closer to the core districts in California, which are a kind of cousin to us, I think. These are districts that actually received, some would argue illegally, a waiver under NCLB, despite the fact that the state of California did not, and have been trying to measure school quality more holistically. And there are many ways to do that, and many things that you can count. And among the things that should count, and a lot of work that has come from APA recommendations, indicates that actually, believe it or not, the people who are closest to the action, students and teachers in this case, if you ask them the right questions in the right way, and you ask them questions that they would be knowledgeable about, and you do it included in the right way would be making sure they're anonymous and that they know that, et cetera, that you can get really reliable data that align with any objective, accountable facets of school quality. So I think the long answer is that, and the short answer is yes.
Let's take one more, and then I have a final question for.
Thank you. My name is Alex Pratt. I'm a legislative aide for Representative Steve Altrino of Malden. And following up on the, yes, I know. Following up on the question from the gentleman from AFT, I wholeheartedly agree, but I do assure you that right next door to the Department of Ed, where they are not super excited about this, there are a lot of folks at Malden Public Schools who are. And so, which is excellent, and I think unsurprising, because we see a lot of these districts, whether it's Revere in Somerville or I'm on my school committee in Littleton, a very different district. There are a lot of administrators and teachers who are excited about this type of work, and they are saying, how do we do this? What next? So two questions, I guess, related to that. One, is there an angle we can use to pressure DESC to get on board with this using ESSA? And if not, can we say, okay, you guys can stay over there, we're going to keep going anyway, and can we bring more districts into the fold, or are we is MCIEA sort of resourced out on the districts it currently is working with.
Maybe someone on the panel, when you speak, can both speak to the larger goals of the consortium, as well as to how the legislature can also express their support.
I think the legislature can express their support by continuing to express their support. Last year in the budgeting process, the legislature very clearly expressed its support, and then the governor decided to withdraw the funding for this work. And so you can continue to express your support by funding it in next year's budget. That's the simplest, I think, and clearest way. But to ESSA, and I would actually defer probably to Dan for the details on this, but my understanding of ESSA is that it removes many of the onerous requirements about how we report school quality, and it demands that states actually rethink the way they measure school quality and test students and all of those kinds of ideas. And the basic message, I think, of the where DESE is heading, that part of Malden, is that nothing to see here. Let's continue down basically the same path. And the thing that's going to tip that over time is people doing the work, people talking to other people about the work. And I mean, the same, I don't want to compare, although in some ways, I don't want to compare this to what we're seeing in the streets. But this is really hurting people too. The way this accountability system has worked for the last many years. It's really hurting people. It's really hurting schools. It's really hurting students and teachers. And so when we see, we learned in November, I think, how much people in Massachusetts value their public schools. And this is part of that. And so the more we can push, I think, for electeds, the people have your back when you stand up for public schools. And so keep doing that, keep publicizing this work, and then we'll get where we need to be.
Add something to that. Politically, you all are experts. Everybody in here knows what politics is all about. As parents, as students, you have a voice, and that's what we need. We need voices that aren't just teacher and administrator voices. We need parent and we need student voices. And those voices need to go to DESE, need to go to ESSA. They need to go to the people who are in charge. They believe very strongly they're doing what's right. We believe very strongly they need to go the next step. And we believe that that next step is what we're doing. The only way to convince them of that is to actually let them know this is where we want to go. It's wonderful that you said that Malden is looking at that. So it's in their home city, basically. But people have to go to meetings, they have to be told, this is where my child is. And individual stories make a huge difference. They really do. Tell your stories. Pick up the phone, email, newspapers, it doesn't matter. But that's what we have to do. We have to make sure that communication gets to them and they understand that they got us to where we are. Now we need to go the next step, and this is where we're going.
So to go a little bit further on your question, I think one of the reasons why the consortium districts came together was with the intent of trying to influence the direction of accountability that the state is headed in. So it is a stated goal of the consortium that in this state we need to build the system first of what it could look like, but then press for a waiver from the feds to allow the consortium districts to have this be their accountability system instead of MCAS 2.0, which is allowable under the new federal regulations. So the goal is really to help lead the way for the state into a new era of what accountability looks like. well, what we are actively recruiting, and we're currently talking to, good half dozen districts, making it clear that the requirement to join is your superintendent, your teacher union president, and your school committee need to be aligned and on board, because we see it takes that complete of a commitment in order to press ahead in this work.
This is an actual follow-up question, which is, I'm sort of an optimist, and I know that DESE is asking people to fill out a form, and I'm going to ask Jessica Lights, who's here from Malden, is it worth people filling out forms and saying what they would like to see in the new accountability system?
Yes, it is. We've had statewide forums on asset accountability. I think I'm loud enough.
Yeah,
And
well,
I don't
they're
need
trying
to
record.
speak for long. Yeah, the department has reached out to all stakeholders, has had public forums over the past several months. Just now is developing a draft plan that will be presented to the board, and will open up a public comment period, an additional public comment period. The whole period's been public comment. So, yeah. Yes, absolutely. We take any and all comments and listen.
Any last comments from the panel? Last thoughts before we wrap up? In a minute or less? No?
I think just everybody being here this morning and showing interest is a huge step. And, going back and telling and talking about it to other people, I think whether it's sending a letter or a note, or to let your current, your district or your district leadership or your legislative leadership know about it, and to pass our contacts along, so that if there's further questions, we'd be more than happy to speak with people, to answer questions, to answer email. But I think this is just, we're in a new era where people need to get involved, and that's from the very top all the way to where we are on the ground. Everybody needs to play a role and to advocate, because once decisions are made, those are the decisions that we will be living with for sure. But even in the system that we're developing, this is new. So we look for comments as well as to how we might be able to better it and to improve it as it gets going. So thanks to everyone for coming out.
Good. And I do want to just at last reiterate something that Paul said, just to be clear about the sequence of events. It was the Mass Consortium was included in the original Senate budget, correct? And it was passed by the House. It was then vetoed by Governor Baker in his final cuts. But the legislature, Senate and House, overwhelmingly overrode it and reinstated that line item, only to have it clawed back by the governor in his recent clawback efforts. So what I can say from that is there's some sense of support within the legislature for a new appetite of what accountability should look like. We now need to convince the governor. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and certainly people are available afterwards for questions.